So joining us now from Washington is Stephen Miller. You might know him. He wrote speeches for President Trump. He was a senior advisor to Mr. Trump, and now he's the president of America First Legal Organization. So from your perch outside of the White House now, Stephen, what's the difference in day-to-day operations between Biden and Trump?
I think the biggest difference that I can see is that President Trump ran an extremely top-down White House. The action was oriented every day, as it should have been, as it ought to be, against a vigorous commander-in-chief. So a small handful of us every day would gather in the Oval Office, oftentimes periodically throughout the whole day, to be given directions and to be tasked with projects. And so he would ask, what's the border situation today? We would say what it was, and he'd say, okay, you need to go out, you need to solve it, you need to fix this problem, and you need to report back to me in 48 hours. What's going on with the energy situation? Where are gas prices? Okay, get me the National Economic Council, let's deal with that. Okay, what's going on, say, Robert O'Brien in the realm of terrorism, ISIS, everything else? Okay, I want to report back from my generals in a week. You get the picture. It was an extremely top-down White House, which is how it has to be in a country as large and complicated as ours. You can't have unnamed staff just setting the agenda every single day. There has to be accountability. What we're clearly seeing in the Biden administration, I think what explains all of this chaos, is it's every staffer for him or herself. So you have Susan Rice, the Domestic Policy Council, doing her thing. You have Ron Klain, the Chief of Staff, doing his thing. You have Lloyd Austin over at the Department of Defense doing his thing. You have Mayorkas at the Department of Homeland Security doing his thing. And so on it goes. And Blinken, God knows what he's doing at the State Department. And so that's why you see no strategy, no vision, no sense of where we're going. A presidency, as you said, that's lost, rudderless.
All right. So it's a proactive President Donald Trump, as opposed to a passive President Joe Biden. Is that the overarch?
Absolutely. Biden is reacting to what happens rather than directing what happens.
All right. Now, you spent a lot of time on the border, studying the border, writing about the border, advising President Trump on border policy. Right now, there's no reporting coming out of the border from Brownsville to San Diego. We get nothing. We don't know what's happening there. This is by design. The corrupt corporate media doesn't want Americans to know what's really happening. Do you know?
Well, I think, first of all, you said it exactly right. This is one of the things that upsets me the most about the corporate media today, is the complete absence of serious coverage about our border crisis. Sure, there's the stray story here and there. This is the most underreported public safety and national security crisis in American history. And to your point, yes, I talk to, on a regular basis, people who are very well placed within the Department of Homeland Security, who keep me apprised of what's going on. And the one thing they say to me all the time is, it's so much worse than people understand. For example, and this is something that you know well, the number of people every day who are classified as gotaways, that's the term that border agents use, gotaways, ranges between 1,000 to 2,000 a day. In other words, every day, 365 days a year by the end of Biden's first year, up to 2,000 people a day can get into this country with no one even laying hands on them. So I'm not even talking about catch and release, which we could talk about for hours. I mean people that get into the country without any interdiction whatsoever by law enforcement. Some are bringing drugs, some are trafficking women and children, some are previously deported criminals, and some come from countries that are on terror threat lists. So any foreign adversary of this country can get people into this country without ever coming through any law enforcement system, any law enforcement screening, ever being on a TSA list, just undetected into our country. It is a true national security catastrophe.
What is the difference between the last year of the Trump administration in inhibiting these illegal aliens coming across the border and now? What is the big difference?
The biggest difference is this. During the last year of the Trump administration, because catch and release was ended, meaning we had a 100% repatriation policy, which is the word we use in immigration circles for sending you back to your home country or another country willing to take you. Because we had a 100% repatriation policy, the numbers crossing were extremely low. What that meant was that agents could be on the line dealing with their public safety, anti-narcotics, and national security mission. In other words, they weren't dealing with the massive humanitarian crisis we see playing out or the massive COVID crisis we see playing out. They weren't dealing with the rush of illegal immigrant families and children and so forth. So they could be on the line performing their public safety, national security, and anti-cartel mission. Now, because agents are processing and releasing historic flows of very low-income, illegal economic migrants, they are not able to perform their public safety or national security mission.
So they can't block because their attention is diverted to so-called administrative work. That's what it is, right?
Yes.
Okay, so when Biden knocked out the Remain in Mexico policy on his first day in office by executive order, do you believe Biden knew this chaos would ensue?
No, I believe the people working for Biden, the people working for him, and this is confirmed by pretty solid sourcing, were absolutely committed to an ideological objective of as much illegal immigration as possible. I believe that Joe Biden had no clue as an intellectual matter, as a mental matter, the Pandora's box that he opened up. I think obviously philosophically he's a very liberal guy, but I think this is a case of his radical deputies having a goal that eclipsed his ability to understand or comprehend.
And that goal is to flood the zone with as many foreign nationals as possible to build up electoral power?
Unquestionably so. I mean, California, when I was, and I've only been around politics for, my adult life. I graduated from college in 2007, but as recently as my time in high school, Republicans were still competitive in California, and now it's a death zone for Republican politics in California. You don't think that Democrats are keenly aware of the ability to do the same thing in states like Texas?
And the shift in California was due to foreign nationals being able to vote because they had papers?
It's mostly the intergenerational process of birthright citizenship and the pull factors and networking factors of having large numbers of illegal immigrants, just in general, making a state into a much more liberal state, a much more of a welfare state, much more of a big government state that happens from just large uncontrolled migration flows from the developing world. But again, birthright citizenship, of course, is a very big factor here, too.
Okay. Now, a federal judge in Amarillo, Texas, ordered Biden to go back to the Remain in Mexico policy. The judge said the president did not have the power to dismantle that policy unilaterally by himself. Does your information say the Biden administration is obeying that order?
They are not obeying it in any faithful understanding of that term. Whether or not they've crossed the line into being held in contempt of court remains to be seen. But in terms of the scope and scale of what they're doing, the gentlest term I could use would be slow walking. The more accurate term that I think ultimately the evidence will show is defying. But certainly they're slow walking it. Under the Trump administration, with simply a few short weeks of the whole government vigorously acting after the president threatened tariffs on Mexico, we were able to return the vast majority of people to Mexico. In other words, it took us a longer time to create the program and build up all the systems, but the Biden administration inherited all those systems. Actually getting Mexico to fully cooperate just took vigorous executive leadership. I don't think Joe Biden is putting any weight at all into complying with the court's order. They're failing on purpose. Let's be real.
Does the Biden administration have a leader other than Joe Biden? I mean, who's calling the shots for all of these insane policies? It can't be Biden.
No, it's not. So it's a really great question because people are trying to decode that. For example, I'll return, I dropped the name earlier, which was Susan Rice. Susan Rice is the head of the Domestic Policy Council. Have you seen any serious in-depth reporting in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, elsewhere, about what she is doing now as the head of domestic policy for the U.S. government? That's in charge of education policy, it's in charge of drug policy, it's in charge of immigration policy, it's in charge of pro-life or pro-abortion policy, as the case may be. I haven't seen any reporting on that. So who is driving the train on these issues? I think it's safe to say that at the State Department, Blinken obviously is calling a lot of the shots and will probably go down in history as the most incompetent Secretary of State we've ever had. But with respect to the whole domestic policy agenda, it's really painfully unclear. My suspicion is that it's probably a network of 6 or 7 people who aren't very well known, who have very hard left leanings, that are probably mid-level staffers that are basically driving the policy unattended by any adult supervision.
Well, you got to feel that the Obamas have some kind of input because Susan Rice is their best friend.
Yeah, so that's, I think, the missing link to a lot of this. There's been a massive lack of attention to this great mystery. And I've talked to reporters about it, and they've said they're mystified too. Why would you go from being the national security advisor of the United States under Obama, be floated for the job of Secretary of State, and then instead take over domestic policy, an issue by which all accounts say Ms. Rice has absolutely no experience or knowledge whatsoever, which means either A, she's directing all these radical policies, or B, she's countenancing all of these radical policies being implemented, again, by more junior staffers who are largely running free of adult supervision.
Right. We'll never know. Though that story will never be told. Final question. Personally, were you surprised that a Roman Catholic like Joe Biden, who in the past had supported the Hyde Amendment, that means that Americans wouldn't be forced to pay for abortions, and now is one of the most radical pro-abortion, probably the most radical pro-abortion president in history? Did you surprise in that transition?
I am surprised. I was surprised when he came out in favor of taxpayer financing of abortions. And then I was equally surprised when he recently said that he doesn't believe that life begins at conception, something he previously professed to believe. And now, of course, you have the Department of Justice suing Texas over the heartbeat legislation, which, in full disclosure, my organization, America First Legal, is part of the legal defense team defending the Texas heartbeat bill. But Biden's transformation into a radical pro-abortion activist, abortion at any time, for any reason, at any period in pregnancy, and with full taxpayer funding, putting him on the furthest extreme left of his party, yes, that does shock and surprise me. But again, I have a strong feeling here that he's so out of it, he's just kind of reciting what younger people working for him are telling him to say.
All right, Stephen Miller, thank you very much. We appreciate it. I found that interview to be very compelling and informative, and we'll get it all over the country so as many people can see it as possible. Stephen, thanks very much. We'll talk soon, I hope.
Thank you, as always.